Buenas tardes y bienvenidos al canal Jacob Sinclair. Vamos a comenzar una serie porque como la gente parece que no se lo está creyendo lo de Nibiru, vamos a comenzar una serie de capítulos explicando todo lo que sabemos de Nibiru. Y vamos a comenzar, como no, hoy con el grandísimo Oberdean. Espero que os guste.
Our remote viewers have concluded that yes, it's going to happen this time. That we and it will be on the same side of the sun at the same time. And if the remote viewer, and they're getting their information from ETs, from sources within the US government that tell me that yes, they are deeply concerned about it and they're worried sick about it and they don't know what to do about it. What could the government or anyone else tell you? What could they say to you? Would they tell you that grab your hat, dig a hole, hang on? He says, oh, it seems to be a rather nice planet and we know about it and all we need to do is name it. And then bless his heart, you know, he had never had a heart problem, but within a year he was dead with a heart attack. Incredible race of humans, does have a future. And it is in the stars. Mm-hmm. And we are going out there to reclaim our rightful place. It's kind of amusing considering that the last time we met, I told you that it was to be my last interview. And here I am again. And, you know, how can I explain that?
We have gotten the most incredible response to your interview. I have to say, it's actually been the most popular of all of our interviews. Well, and I think there's a reason for that.
Oh, thank you.
I think that in many ways you put yourself on the line and you actually embody the curiosity that was like rampant in all of us. And you did it at a time when, and in the military no less, and you broke rules and you kind of stuck it out and you're just, I don't know, a one-man disclosure project as far as I'm concerned.
Well, thank you, Carrie. That's very kind of you to say that. But let me explain something. I was a normal human being for a big portion of my life. You know, I was a career military and no nonsense kind. I wore a crew cut. When I learned what I learned in 1963, 64, 65, it changed my life. It changed my way of thinking, and I became obsessed with what I had learned. And over the years, I've learned so much more. And as I may have mentioned to you earlier, I learned a little bit. I wanted more. You know, talk about an addiction. When you start learning some things about a subject that is so profound, the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. And the more I wanted to know, the more I learned. And the more I learned, the more obsessed I became. And you talk about losing a paradigm. My old paradigm literally crumbled around my knees. You know, the world that I thought I lived in I learned was not the world that I lived in. And the reality that I looked around and thought I saw was not the reality that exists. Mm-hmm. That much of what we see is an illusion. It's a result of our own illusions. We humans sometimes, rather than face reality, we create a little world of our own. You know, we get up and go to work, we raise the kids, we buy a house, buy a car, take a vacation, go on about our lives, try to save money, put a little in the bank for the kids' college, and live a normal life. And then I learned that there's no such thing as a normal life, that the world that exists is not at all what we think it is. And the more I learned, as I said, my old paradigm crashed around my knees, and I'm sitting here in front of you as a human wreck, you might say, as to what I used to be, because I lived in a world that was kind of cut and dried. Oh, do this, do that, pay your bills. It's not that way at all.
Well, let's cut to the chase here, because you have come forward. Actually, you contacted us, I'm going to say, and said, you've got something new to say. You've got something new to tell the people. And I know you're going to be speaking at the Bay Area conference, and this is amazing. And let's find out, what is it that's new? What is it you're willing to?
You want me to divulge to you my great revelations, which I'm planning to speak about at the conference, right?
Absolutely. And this video will not be edited and out there before the conference, so you don't have to worry that we're not going to ruin it for the viewers of the conference.
There's lots of little tidbits that are kind of interesting to me. I hope they'll be interesting to the people at San Jose. It's been my experience that the people who attend those conferences are pretty wide open-minded. Mm-hmm. As I jokingly used to say, when I speak there, it's like preaching to the choir, mm-hmm. because they're a different group of people. I'll give you a tiny tidbit, which I found interesting. As you perhaps have understood, I have been a member of what we used to jokingly call the Old Boys Network. I've been a member of it for over 40 years. And when we created this group, it was made up of military types primarily, all ranks, all services. And we even had a couple of cosmonauts who were connected with this, mm-hmm. who were providing information. Well, over the years, the old boys have shared information with each other, because we've had a variety of assignments and jobs in the military. We had a couple of admirals, we had a general, had 2 cosmonauts, we have innumerable colonels and command sergeant majors and people from all walks everywhere who provided information we used to share with each other. And some of us have been in very sensitive positions and had access to very highly classified material. And we've been very open about sharing that with others, which kind of kept us going for a long, long time. There aren't a hell of a lot of us left. The last time originally there was roughly about 150 members of this group. And today there's probably not more than a dozen left. We lost a good one. Graham Bethune died here about a year ago. And Graham was a retired Navy commander who was a dear man, who had some very sensitive information he used to share with others. But as I point out, we shared among ourselves. And then a few of us who came out blatantly, purposely, and started sharing what we had learned with the public. Frankly, I never thought I was going to get away with it. I thought they were going to stamp on me and, eliminate me or whatever. There was even rumors, for God's sake, that they were going to call me back to active duty and court-martial me. I'm going to be 80 at my next birthday, so I don't think they want to call me back to active duty. I could have an accident, but I think why I'm getting away with what I'm getting away with, so to speak, where I'm releasing bits and pieces of this cover-up, is that there's somebody back there somewhere who wants me to do what I'm doing, or I would not have been able to do this. But let me give you a tiny tidbit of bits and pieces that come from the Old Boys Network. There is an organization called the National Reconnaissance Office. You've probably heard of it.
Absolutely.
A very super secret group, and super secret group among super secret groups. God, we've got so damn many groups now. As I used to jokingly say, when poor old Ike left office, he tried to tell us about the military-industrial complex. Well, it's a triad now. It's not just the military and industry. Mm-hmm. It's the national security agencies as well. So if he could see it today, he'd be shocked even more. Of course, I'm sure he's alive and well somewhere, so he's probably looking down, chuckling. But we are a triad now. The super secret agencies with the military and the industry. It's all like this.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, there are people who I think want this out. We've known for years that among the in crowd, whoever the hell they are, and no one really has ever been able to put our finger on it. We've been able to grab a club from the old Magi group, the wise men they called themselves. The Magi, you've heard them referred to as the Majestic 12. Well, they're a lot more than 12 now. Anyhow, I'm getting away with sharing bits and pieces and tidbits which intrigue me because I think somebody wants some of this out. But the story I was going to share with you is that in the National Reconnaissance Office, about, I guess, 4 or 5 years now, they had for a number of years a series of satellites called the Keyhole system. You've heard of it?
Yes.
Keyhole. Oh, it was super secret and probably the very best satellite system in the world. Mm-hmm. Well, they probably made it even better now. They could supposedly read a postage stamp from space. Well, there were some intriguing questions being raised by a number of people about what was known as the Ararat Anomaly. Are you familiar with the Ararat Anomaly?
Mount Ararat, Noah's Ark.
Okay.
And so the guys in the NRO took their keyhole system and focused on the Ararat Anomaly, which is, you know, a puzzle. Well, when the word got out, when the pictures finally were downloaded, and they computerized and enhanced them and cleaned them up, and they pushed them on the wall, or they broadcast them on the wall there at NRO, the remarks went something like this, and these are actual quotes. Jesus Christ, it's a goddamn boat. Christ, it's a big boat. Okay, one would say, why would something like that be so highly classified that it is way above top secret? Why would the discovery of a boat on Mount Ararat be classified so high, far above, you know, anything? Anyhow, the story comes out. The reason they classified it is because after they discovered that it was a goddamn boat, a big goddamn boat, they inserted a team of SEALs on the site. Now, that's a term that the military uses to put a bunch of guys on a scene.
Right.
Apparently, they dropped them by aircraft. They parachuted down, a dozen of them or so. They inserted them onto the scene, and these guys spent several days in this goddamn boat. And then they extracted them by helicopters. And when they extracted them, the guys brought with them some anomalous artifacts, which have never been described or named. But those anomalous artifacts is what led to this whole thing being classified not only top secret, but way the hell above. And that's a little bit of information that's come out via the network of the old.
So are
boys.
you saying this is Noah's Ark?
No one knows what it is. It was originally the Ararat Anomaly, but then they discovered that it was a gigantic boat, apparently.
But a boat built by humans.
Well, it appears to be. It's essentially, from what they gathered, wood. Mm-hmm. But it's a work of genius, apparently. It was intricately put together. And it's really...
And it survived all these years.
Well, apparently. The question, how many years, you know? When was the flood? The last rumor I had was 12,000 years ago. 10,500 BC.
When are they saying? I mean, I'm sure you have a theory.
Well, the religious implications of it, you see, You know, every ancient culture on the planet has a similar tradition about a flood. And I'm sure there were many Noahs, so to speak, wherever. But the idea that this particular thing is so theologically sensitive that some yo-yo back there at NRO decided to classify it. And then they sent the SEALs in, and the SEALs brought back artifacts. Well, there you are, you see. What could they have possibly found in this big wreck that is so sensitive? Question arises. I don't know the answer to that. Hopefully, if the old boy still stays alive a few years, we might find out. I find that interesting, and I share it with people because it gives you an insight into that bunch of nitwits back there that classify everything.
Bill, go ahead with your question about Mount Ararat, and then we're going to move on from there.
I think it was Charles Berlitz who wrote a book. Now, this is purely from memory, which was called The Great Ship of Noah. And he published a bunch of photographs. These photographs are on the internet of something that looks like a ship on Ararat. And there are two versions of this from what I've heard. One is fairly low down, and which is an enormous thing that looks like a whole lot of ship's timbers. And there are persistent reports of another object that's much higher up, way above the snow line, quite close to the summit. And I wonder if you could say which of these, if either, has been picked up by the keyhole satellites and analyzed. And when the seals were inserted, did they carbon date the wood?
Oh, I'm sure they must have, but I haven't got any information on that. My guess is, Bill, that the seals were inserted on the one on toward the top, up above the snow line. That's the indication that I got, that that was the one that they went in, they landed, they dropped, they parachuted in. Spent a number of days up there, apparently. But what they brought back in the terms of anomalous artifacts is the thing that intrigued me. Why would they classify it so far above top secret? But that bunch of nitwits back there, and I've known some of them over the years. I've worked with some of them. And I think they are a bunch of damn nitwits. You know, there's no damn reason why they've classified so much.
What year was this when the SEALs were sent in?
About 5 years ago, from what I can gather.
Really?
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
Well, the Keyhole program was really big in the late 90s. Now, I'm sure they've got satellite programs that are even better now. We've got civilian programs that are so damn good that the Department of Defense will often go to the civilian contractors and buy photographs taken by civilian satellites that are outstanding. So it leads you to suspect maybe how much better could be some of our DoD satellites.
Right.
You know, they have classified Lake Vostok. They took it away from JPL, who was monitoring it, and, you know, with satellites and all. You're familiar with Lake Vostok in Antarctica?
Oh, no.
Oh, God, that's a sensitive story in itself. Under the ice in Antarctica, there is a freshwater lake deep, deep down under the ice that's 100 miles long, about 50 miles wide. Fresh water. The temperature in the damn lake is about 65 degrees, which is pleasant swimming, you might say. But at the end of Lake Vostok is what's known as a gigantic mass con, a mass concentration of metal, very similar to the mass cons they discovered on the moon. Gigantic circular-shaped metallic objects deep under the ice at the end of Lake Vostok. Highly classified. JPL had it. National Security Agency took it away from JPL. It's one of the most sensitive things in the world now as to what is the anomaly at the end of the lake, the mass concentration that is so easily picked up by satellites. Another top secret, you know? Mm-hmm. You're the common folk. You're not supposed to know that.
Right.
Why? well, you can't handle it, you see. The implications of it are just too vast.
Well, tell me this. Do the Chinese know it?
Oh, I'm sure they do. As you may know, the Chinese now have gone into space in a big way. It never gets into the newspaper, but the last I heard, the Chinese have a satellite orbiting the moon, taking lots of pictures. Well, I'm hoping that the Chinese publish a lot of those pictures, because our own NASA people took many, many pictures. The Army took thousands of pictures under the Clementine project. Are you familiar with Clementine?
I've heard of it.
It was not a NASA program, it was an Army program, Department of Defense. They took thousands of pictures. They've only released a dozen or so. They took pictures all around the moon, backside, bottom, top, everywhere.
Well, are you in touch with Richard Hoagland?
I know Richard. He's a good friend.
Okay. So you know some of his recent research?
Well, I read his recent book, which is Dynamite.
Uh-huh. Okay.
You
know about the secret space program?
Oh, yeah.
And you know about the von Braun and the Nazis and what's been carried over to the U.S.
Hundreds bigger than that.
Okay. Well,
much bigger.
But when I raised up Richard Hoagland's information and the stuff that he's bringing forward about von Braun, the Nazis, paperclip, and you're saying it's much beyond that. So where are we going with that?
Our original space program was all a product of the Nazi Party. Without von Braun and his crew and the paperclip program, I don't think we would have gotten to the moon when we did. We certainly wouldn't have beaten the Russians. Because the Russians grabbed their crowd. They also went to Germany and grabbed a bunch of scientists. And then the Russians have a tremendous scientific program of their own. They didn't need Nazi scientists. They would have eventually done it on their own anyhow. But one of the biggest secrets of all is the secret space program. The fact that NASA it's like Blue Book used to be. I think it's a public relations front.
Right. Yeah.
Blue Book never handled the real good stuff. And everybody knew that, except the common folk out there who were diddled regularly and never told the truth about anything. But the big secret seems to have been for so long is, why are we keeping classified the enormous facilities on the moon? And they're not ours.
Whose are they?
Well, that's a good question. I can tell you flatly who they are.
Okay.
You familiar with the term Anunnaki?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, you really have to understand Zecharia Sitchin's work to really grasp where we stand today in relationship with this group of intelligences. And I'm not speaking of one. There are several. The last I heard, there were 4 different groups we were relating with. The Anunnaki are one, and there are others.
Okay, this is very interesting. Can you describe the Anunnaki that first of all, have you had exposure to them face to face?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, I've met some face to face.
Okay.
Now, whether they were the Anunnaki, I don't know.
Okay, well.
The ones I've run face to face were typically human.
Typically human.
I mean, they could put on a suit, tie, a dress, blue jeans, t-shirt.
Okay.
Walk in our midst and you would never know.
And they weren't 9 feet tall or higher?
No. The ones I've met and the ones I've seen aboard the ships are not that big at all. They're just like us. So we're dealing with 4 different groups that I've concluded, my own personal view.
Okay.
Yeah, you might talk to Jim Sparks and he might tell you there are 8 or 10 or a dozen more. I don't know. I can only tell you what little bit I've learned over the years. There are 4 different groups that I've encountered, and they're all humanoid. One group is completely human. And not all of the Anunnaki are 9 feet tall. They were human enough that we are related to them and they're related to us. And that lovely little story in chapter 6 of Genesis is quite true. They did indeed engineer the genes and chromosomes of an existing species on this planet. God knows how long ago. Sitchin says it was 200,000 years. The information I have learned indicates that one of the major tweaking took place about 60,000 years ago. That Homo sapiens were tweaked and genetically manipulated even more. So we're coming along slowly.
Okay, so what 4 races? Let's name them, in your opinion.
Well, there are the humans.
Okay.
Some people call them the Nordics. Then you have guys that are very pale and very tall and very broad, which some people refer to as the big whites.
Okay.
And then you have the little guys.
The Greys, and then the Anunnaki. So those are the 4 you're familiar with.
And not all of the Greys are an evolved species. Some of them appear to be what they used to use. They were an artificial life form.
Androids.
Yeah, they were humanoid androids, but they were constructed. They're laboratory products. And they often wondered why, in cases of crashes, where there were survivors, that some of them didn't come back and try to retrieve. And the story that came out among the military for many years was that they wrote them off. They went back and made more. Now there are some people who say, well, they don't have a soul. Well, I run into human beings that I began to wonder whether they had a soul. But
okay,
there are 2 types of Greys from what I've learned. There are the little guys who would appear to be laboratory products. And then there are the 6-foot Greys, whose eyes are more round. And they're not really gray, they're just sort of a chalky off-white color. And they seem to be an evolved race all of their own. And I think those are the ones that probably ran into Betty Hill and Barney at the incident many years ago.
Have you heard about Dan Burish talking about the Orions that are sitting in ships along with the military, actually watching the planet right now?
I've heard bits and pieces of that. I don't know too much about Dan's story. He's come up with a great many things.
Okay, but this is just new information that he's actually come forward with.
Well,
and they're watching the planet to see what happens and whether or not we have a catastrophe of any kind. And whether they might have to step in.
We have photographs, and many of them I'm going to share and show. I have slides, photographs of gigantic objects. I'm talking about humongous objects in space. And many of them are in satellites around their orbit around the planet. Many of them are in orbit around the moon, around Mars. I have a couple of pictures that I'm going to share that I got from a Soviet cosmonaut on what happened with the Phobos thing. The Russians, their famous Phobos rocket system that they sent up there some years back, which got knocked out of orbit by an anomalous object that came up from the surface. But it had taken a number of outstanding photographs before it was damaged and crashed.
Okay, what will you called it, an anomalous, I don't know, object that came up from the surface, meaning the surface of the
Mars.
moon?
From
Mars. Earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the Phobos program was sent to Mars because they had hoped to land a lander on the satellite Phobos. There are 2 circling Mars, which are anomalous. Again, that fantastic word, anomalous. Astronomers consider them anomalous because, first of all, they're going in the wrong direction for a natural satellite, whatever that means. They're too small to be natural satellites, and they're too close to the surface of Mars to have survived. Because if they were natural, they would long ago have been brought down and sucked in by gravity and crashed. The fact that they're still there puzzles everybody. So the Russians said, we're going to land on Phobos. It's about 12 miles in diameter. I think Deimos is only about 6 or 7. They're going to take some pictures of the surface. Well, you know, apparently the intelligence is up there, decided, no, you're not going to do that, and bumped Phobos, the satellite that the Soviets sent up, knocked it out of orbit, and it crashed, apparently.
But they've been doing that to the JPL craft going up and around Mars
There
years now.
is an intelligence on Mars that wants to limit our access to their reality. And they've done a damn pretty good job of it.
Well, our witness, Henry Deacon, and I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm familiar with him. I don't know him well.
Okay. He has said that the Anunnaki are on Mars in bases.
I agree with that.
So are they the ones shooting down those objects, you know, the various
probably.
craft from JPL and so on?
Look, Zechariah has said, and I know this old man, I respect him tremendously. He says they never left. They withdrew overtly from their activities on the planet with us, but their activities have continued covertly, both on Earth, the Moon, and Mars. And from the knowledge I have and the limited amount of information I've been able to get, that the primary focus, the primary intelligence behind all of this are the Anunnaki, the same group that genetically engineered us so many thousands of years ago.
Okay, but you've got Enki and Enlil, right? And these are warring brothers, and one is working for the positive side of humanity.
Well,
and
you
the
had
other...
this dysfunctional family. They even went to war with each other. And man was in the middle, as he always has been. You know, we were a product of their engineering. They engineered us as a slave species. They engineered us to work for them.
But aren't they still at war?
Apparently there is still, and some of our remote viewers, and I know a few of them, I've done a little of it myself. And believe me, it works.
Mm-hmm.
I've been accused of being guilty of front loading, so to speak, because when I want to look at something, I know what I want to look at. The military originally trained their guys to not know what they were looking for, and then they would download, you know, and compare and such.
Right.
But when I want to look at something, I know exactly what I want to look at. One of the greatest, of course, is Ingo Swann.
Oh, absolutely.
A tremendous guy. What an intellect that guy.
Oh, incredible. We're dying to interview him. Do you know him?
Well, he and I have corresponded. I wrote a nice article about him one time years ago.
Uh-huh.
And he wrote me a letter and thanked me for it and told me he appreciated
Lovely.
it a lot.
Yes.
But he is a rare man. He's a rare intellect.
Yes.
Not only is he probably the best remote viewer we've ever had, perhaps other than Pat Price,
Right.
that Ingo's come up with stuff on the moon. That you have to read his book.
Actually, I have.
Penetration.
Yes.
It's dynamite.
And it's hard to get a hold of.
Yeah,
I understand.
It should be reissued because it'd sell like hotcakes.
Absolutely.
I spoke about it on Coast to Coast a couple of times with Art Bell. And apparently it became so damn hot that, you know, you can't find a copy. And $200 or $300 each if you can find one.
Yeah. Well, I have. I don't know if I still have it, but I had one.
Yeah. Well, hold on to it. It's gold.
Uh-huh.
But Ingo is gold himself.
Okay, but let's kind of like move back to the question, because I want to get sort of drill down to this answer. So they're still at war.
They still have a difference of opinion about us. Now, whether Enlil and Enki,
Uh-huh.
he goes by two names,
Okay.
whether they still are alive or not,
Right.
with the genetic geniuses that they have been, that they are, they can genetically manipulate. You know, they ingeniously genetically manipulated their own chromosomes, DNA, till they literally have become practically immortal. Now, I wouldn't be a bit surprised that Enki and Enlil may still be alive.
Mhm.
Maybe they're running around with a cane like I do and grunting and groaning. You know, they got the great grandkids doing the running, and I don't know that, and I'm sure that no one else does. But apparently, the factions are still divided, and the one side wants to use us, as they always did, and the other side wants to give us the opportunity to be our own species, to chart our own future, and to call, you know, to determine our own lives.
Mhm.
And there apparently has this been difference of opinion going on.
So when we get back to the national security state and the state of the U.S. right here and now, I mean, you're an ex-military. I hardly want to call you ex because I think you're in some ways probably still consulted here and there. You know, we're about to go to war with Iran. What's your perspective on this? We're not?
No, we're not.
Okay.
And that's my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for whatever it's worth. You know,
Sure.
I have a half penny in my pocket. I don't believe that we're going to have a nuclear war because I don't think the custodians will allow it.
Right.
The planet is too valuable. It's too rich a reservoir of life. Not only the humans here on this planet, but all the other creatures. This planet is an absolute cornucopia of beautiful, beautiful forms of life. And not only that, but the what is it, the fauna and the what's the other term?
Flora.
The flora.
Uh-huh.
The flora is infinite almost.
Yeah.
No, the planet's too valuable.
Okay.
They've got a lot invested in planet Earth, and they're not about to let it go to a nuclear war because they have the power to see that it does not happen. And I want to tell you something else. You've heard this old rumor about the Prime Directive?
Mm-hmm.
Bullshit. It doesn't exist.
Right. Okay.
They have been interfering here, breaking the so-called Prime Directive over the centuries, so thousands of times. They have been interfering, according to our historical records, back to ancient Greece. They probably had a hand in that damn dust-up at Troy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they took sides. There were even rumors in Homer's reports that the gods themselves came down and took sides and played in the game. To them, it's a game.
Right. Well, the Bhagavad Gita, if you're familiar with it, I mean,
filled with it. The Vedas are filled with it, you see.
Absolutely.
Richard Thompson is a genius. He's written a book about it.
Ah.
Alien Identities, it's called.
Okay, I'll take a look.
Read it if you get a
Yes,
chance. Richard Thompson.
Okay, now I'm going to change gears.
He worked with Cremo on there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were jointly wrote that book on hidden history of the human race.
Oh, okay.
Cremo and Thompson wrote that. Well, Richard wrote a book of his own called Alien Identities, and it's filled with Vedic facts, which you would enjoy.
Yeah.
But the history's pretty clear. They've intervened over the centuries, again and again and again, wherever it seemed appropriate to their benefit on their behalf. And they've gotten in our wars. They've messed around in that whole mess.
Okay, but what about Planet X?
Oh, it's a reality.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So what are they going to do about that?
Well, apparently they are concerned about, you know the story. According to Sitchin and according to the Sumerians, it's a reality. Mm-hmm. Well, our astronomers apparently have concluded that it is indeed a reality. For almost a century, astronomers have been concerned and interested about what they called an intruder that seems to come and go from time to time, and they can measure it by the perturbations and the effects on other planets. They've known its existence for a long time, but they've never gone public about it. Well, in the early 80s, the JPL, the guys at
Jet Propulsion
Jet
Lab.
Propulsion, used to call it Jack Parsons Laboratory,
Yes.
which I think is probably where the original JPL came from,
Yes.
because Jack Parsons established it. Anyhow, they set out a couple of Pioneers satellites back in '82 just to try to determine if there was some truth to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Pioneers apparently came back with data which said not only yes, but hell yes. And the Pioneers concluded, the Pioneer satellite data concluded. So, wow, astronomers were troubled by that. Whew. Could this thing be real? And well, what did they do? They sent out what they called an infrared astronomical satellite. I think they called it IRAS, and this was done in '83. They sent the IRAS out, taking infrared pictures all around the ecliptic, above and below. And apparently IRAS got 2 giant positive responses that yes, the 12th planet, the 10th planet, however you want to call it, yes, it's real. And that's when the lid slams down.
So it's out there, it's on its way back in, right?
According to the Sumerians in Sitchin, apparently it is. And if you're a student of history, as one of my majors, its last pass was 1600 BC. The Sumerians and Sitchin and all of those say it has an orbit of 3,600 years.
Mm-hmm.
So as like many of us, I count on my fingers and toes and figure, 1600 BC, it has an orbit of 3,600 years. Wow, it's due. Well, apparently it is.
So
Now,
why are they keeping this a secret?
Because
you're an expert on secrets.
Listen, every time Nibiru would make a
Bien, vamos a hacer un pequeño inciso, porque si bien Overdean es uno de los grandes y de los grandes divulgadores de Nibiru, mete varios fakes. Uno es el de decir que Zecaria y Sitchin, o sea, está en lo cierto, que lo de los sumerios y lo de los Anunnakis tiene relación con Nibiru. Y lo segundo que ha metido el fake aquí es en que pasa cada 3.600 años. No es correcto. Su órbita es mucho más amplia. Seguimos.
pass. It was not always devastating. It would depend on whether the planet Earth and Nibiru were on the same side of the sun at the same time. And if we were on the same side of the sun at the same time, all hell would break loose on planet Earth. Well, apparently, last pass triggered the explosion of Santorini, Terra, the volcano in the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea, blew its top, brought to a close the great Minoan civilization. Among other things, it affected Egypt. It's all in the records, apparently. There are even historians and theologians who say that Santorini's explosion is exactly what you're reading about when the plagues and all hit Egypt. It allowed Moses to get the Israelites out. But if you look at 1600 BC and figuring that was a relatively recent past, it's due now, and apparently the guys in the astronomical observatories know it. And that, again, is above top secret. Let me give you a tiny example. For a number of years ago, there were 2 brilliant guys working at the Naval Observatory in Washington. Tom Van Flandern is one who I hope you've interviewed.
No, but yeah, please continue, and we'd love to do
He's
that.
no longer with the Naval Observatory. The other one was the chief astronomer at the observatory, a brilliant man by the name of Robert Harrington.
Right.
And Harrington gave an interview to Zecharia Sitchin. a number of years ago. I think it was 91 or so,
Mm-hmm.
where he came right out and said, Dr. Sitchin, we are interested in this because it ties in perfectly with the work you've done on the Sumerians and the ancient planet Nibiru. He said, we found it. It's real. We have photographs of it. And he says, from what we can put together, it's a rather nice planet. It's about 2.5 times the size of the Earth. Apparently, it's heading toward the system, the center of the system. We've concluded about everything about it, except that we haven't named it. And Zechariah spoke up and he says, it's already been named. He says, you simply call it Nibiru. The Sumerians called it the planet of the crossing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mrs. Sitchin and I were in agreement. I miss her. She died about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
She was convinced that Robert Harrington had died because somebody bumped him off, because he had the courage to come out and give Zechariah this interview. I don't know whether you've seen it or not. It's on tape.
No, I haven't seen it, but we interviewed Lucas Scantamburlo about this subject, and he's also talked about Robert Harrington.
Yeah, well, Harrington gave the interview to Zechariah, and it's on a video called Are We Alone? And I think you can pick it up at the conference here next week.
Okay.
I have a copy, and I sent a copy to Neil Frere, who's a man you should interview.
Okay, well, we're in touch with Neil. He's a very interesting guy.
Oh, he's brilliant.
He's a brilliant guy.
He's brilliant. He just recently came out and admitted that he's had an intimate interrelationship with extraterrestrial intelligence since he was a child.
Well, he's always talking about the Anunnaki. I do know this.
Well, he wrote a book called Breaking the Godspell.
Mm-hmm.
And he has supported Zechariah's work for years.
I have a question, Bob, if I may, about the provenance of this information, in the sense that Zechariah Sitchin's work is very well documented, and a lot of people watching this video will be very familiar with his books and with all the intelligent commentary about that. Are you saying that you have additional information based on your contacts within the Old Boys Network, or are you doing a neat presentation?
Many of my conclusions are my own, and they, in many respects, correlate perfectly with Sitchin's work, which is, Neil has told me, he says, Zechariah really should get the Nobel Prize, but I don't know what they would grant it to him in what field. But he's such an outstanding scholar in what he's done, and the Earth Chronicles is what he calls all of his work. Well, I think there's 7 or 8 of them now.
I have 2 questions. One's a minor one to do with celestial mechanics. And it's just something that I've never understood, and I've heard this question from many other people as well. That if Nibiru comes from the outer reaches of the solar system, it's going to be an icy rock, which isn't going to be the kind of place beings could live on or would want to live on. And researcher Andy Lloyd, who you probably have heard about, has theorized that what they're seeing in the photographs that you refer to as an orange object is actually a brown dwarf, with the possibility of Nibiru being one of its moons. And there's a lot of debate about how to apply what Sitchin seems to have been saying to the real practicalities of life on an icy rock out in the orbit of Pluto. And I wondered if you knew or had anything to say about that.
No, it's not an ice. And yes, when it makes its long journey out and back, it gets so far away from the sun that the sun is probably no more than a little tiny prick of light, a little tiny pinpoint. And if you would think that it would be naturally icy cold. No, it apparently the planet, like many planets in the system here, generate its own heat. It has in its core a generating heat system very much like our own. We have a system within the core of this planet that has been described as a thermonuclear reaction, very similar to the sun. Now, most of the life and all of the bounty and all of the beauty of life on this planet comes from our going around this beautiful sun. But I don't think Nibiru is a icy rock. No, I think, first of all, that it probably generates enough of its own heat. And I think they probably did indeed create for themselves, with the advanced technology that they have, a kind of a Dyson sphere. Are you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Brilliant British astronomer, I think, Freeman Dyson, said some years ago that an incredibly advanced technology will have the ability to enclose its planet and retain not only its heat, but its atmosphere. And I suspect that the Anunnaki have done that to Nibiru, and they probably did it, good enough, hundreds of thousands, maybe a million years ago. So the planet, I think the color from it, the dull red golden color, is a result of that envelope of gold shell that they've created. They've created for themselves a Dyson sphere around their planet. And I suspect that any advanced technology will ultimately do the same, simply because it makes sense. It's a practical thing.
But if they had that degree of engineering capability, why wouldn't they just live on Mars instead of hurtling through the solar system?
Well, they weren't the original occupants of Mars. They was a race station. They reactivated it, and I agree with Zechariah on that. They reactivated their way system. They used to drop off there. So there are, I don't think, original inhabitants of Mars.
No,
There are a few original inhabitants on Mars. There's been some indications, which I've been looking into and gotten some data. We're playing host to a bunch of Martians on this planet. About the original species.
Do you know anything about the original species?
Other than the only thing, I've talked to a couple of remote viewers who've apparently been able to come up face to face with, so to speak, ended up looking a lot like American Indians. And I may have met a Martian, but I've known so many strange people in my life.
Sure, I mean, I understand this well enough to know not to look for the comment. That, believe it or not, was going to be the minor question. I have one big one, something, or maybe I misunderstood you a little earlier on, I think, in the conversation that Kerry. Some Linda now Mars, quite a lot of people expecting there may be a as a kind of major celestial 9/11 event in our sky.
We're talking about a false flag kind of situation.
Yes. And
if we would pull that off, if any of our idiot nitwits back there think that they pull that off, I think they absolute damn fools themselves, because I don't believe it would work. I don't think you can do that when you've got the real power out there that wouldn't allow that to happen.
Not so much in vision, but a big display in the sky. And to make people easier to control. Rosin said that she had always been told by Werner von Braun many years ago.
Yeah, Werner shared that apparently before he died, that it was one of the programs that the government at the time was considering. You know, they've had these little plots they've been working on. War, that war, the stock market crash, this, that, you know, all these little magician things that while I'm showing you this and I'm picking your pocket this one. They may have had that in mind at that time, but I don't think they're thinking of it seriously now, because I think that our so-called powers that be, which is, are in such close relationship and with the real power, it would work. They would never allow it. It's they're not going to allow a thermonuclear war. There's too much real estate here. That's the rich mind of human. What a ripe reservoir of genes and got the whole species plus all the other fauna and all the other flora. This is a valuable planet, and they own it. We just live on it. They follow. Charles was right. We are property. To remain property until we reach a point where we can literally stand up and say, all right, we're going to do this now ourselves. And with the universe, dealing with a universe filled with life, and most of it is so unknown, we're going to do this now ourselves. Most of it is so unknown.
La línea empieza voy a hacer aquí con la segunda parte y el debate. Y